Welcome to the Impact Multiplier CEO podcast. If you're a chief executive or if you think like one and you want to create exponentially greater impact, then this show is for you. My name is Richard Metcalf, founder of Xquadrant. I coach some of the most successful and impressive CEOs and executive teams on the planet and help them achieve even more extraordinary results. Because no matter how successful you've been in the past, there's always a whole new level of impact available to you. So, if you're ready to play a bigger game than ever before, I invite you to join us and become an Impact Multiplier CEO. Today I talk with Frank Millar, who is the Chief Executive of CPI, which is the Centre for Process Innovation, a UK-based technology innovation centre that really catalyses different players to bring deep technology innovations to market. Frank's a really interesting person. He had a career in the military, in oil and gas. He then went into this role, and he's on a mission to create more of a goods-based, manufacturing, technology-driven economy to rejuvenate places that perhaps the Industrial Revolution passed through and in some senses are left behind on some levels. And he really shares a number of really interesting insights about his vision, his mission, how he mobilized his people around that, how you create ecosystems, how you create a culture that responds to challenge, that embraces challenge, and also how he needs to up-level personally and help the whole organization level up in order to have increasing impact and scale beyond their current reach. It's a really interesting conversation. Frank's a really reflective person, gives really clear insights. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with Frank Millar. Well, hello, Frank, and welcome to the show.
Hi, Richard. Good morning. Delighted to be here.
This is going to be fun. I'm really curious to get to find out what this mysterious organization is called CPI. It kind of sounds like it might be some kind of spy agency or intergovernmental, I don't know, Mission Impossible kind of unit, but possibly it's not. So before we dive into kind of, I know you're the chief executive. I know you're on this on a bit of a mission as a result of this. But before we get into that, explain a little bit, what is CPI?
Sure. Okay. Well, we are not the Consumer Prices Index. So, if you Google CPI, that's what you'll find. So we can come to that later. We're a business. We focus on disruptive, transformative, what I would call market-creating deep tech innovation. And just to uncouple that a little bit, we're talking about supporting companies of all sizes through what are medium and long-term innovation cycles. So that's 5 to 15 years typically. So these are long innovation cycles where companies are bringing new concepts, new processes, new products to market. And I would differentiate that from the incremental innovation that most companies are capable of doing in and of themselves.
Right. So these are kind of places, these are innovations where perhaps private investors are going to find that a long time frame for their payback, right? But these are kind of market defining technology shifts.
Big technology shifts. And they tend to be from, the way a system has developed or the way a product cycle has developed, and then a recognition that there's a big disruption needed. I'll give you an example. We did a lot of work in healthcare. And very specifically in pharmaceutical manufacturing. And a few years ago, the pharmaceutical industry gathered in their sort of industry body and said, there's a way that we are conducting manufacturing, which we can see is not going to support the personalization of future pharmaceuticals. And so we need to completely rethink our manufacturing technologies and our manufacturing processes. Now, we've all learned through the pandemic how critical quality, safety, regulatory compliance is. So you can imagine in organizations like that, you don't just get to change things overnight. You have to go through a very considered, and bringing new technology in is a carefully considered process. So what we've been able to do is to gather that motivation in the industry and say, look, we're an organization that can combine your interests. We can use, a genuine interest from the public sector to say it is in our interests to keep pharmaceutical manufacturing in this country, adding value, the contribution it makes to employment, the contribution it makes to the economy. We don't want to see the UK lose that. We want to see that anchored in the UK. So let's work together. Let's form this innovation ecosystem, if you like, in order to transform and bring that level of innovation into that industry. So here we are about 5 years later, having done a huge amount of work and, with an established way of working. We've got equipment now, we've got trained engineers and scientists, we've got industry aligned around a series of what we call grand challenges, the big programs that they want to deliver. And we now have a landscape in front of us that says we can now move into that implementation phase and really transform the way that industry will manufacture over the next 10, 15, 20 years.
Right. So this is really about aligning different players across the whole ecosystem. It's not just an individual company who's got one individual technology.
That's right. It's very much about ecosystems. If you think about, I've mentioned pharmaceutical manufacturing. If you think about, what we need to do in terms of working with supply chains to enable them to adopt more sustainable materials, processes, technologies in order to meet, their Scope 3 emissions regulation and expectations, what their customers are demanding from them. These are big, long-term disruptions, and they can only really be achieved with huge partnerships. And I think that's one of our particular skills is being the convener, the neutral partner who can bring all of that thinking and ideas together.
Got it. Yeah, fascinating. So tell me about how you got involved in this, because I know you have a personal background in the military and then in the oil and gas sector. So how did you end up getting involved in the world of business innovation and deep tech? And possibly even more than the how did you get involved, is why did you get involved?
So the how is probably the how and the why are sort of, I'm not quite sure which came first, and they still sort of intersect with each other. I had, as you say, I had a career I'm an engineer by background, so I've always had a career in some form of technology or large engineering projects. And I suppose I got to the point where we were taking some of the technology that we had. I was working for a company in Manchester. We were taking that technology all over the world, and I was seeing you could see its sunset was coming. We'd had it on patent for a long time. We'd refreshed it, but the market had moved on, and we were going to have to reinvent it. And it piqued my curiosity for who invents new technology? Where does it come from? Having always been a user of it, not an inventor of it. And via a slightly circuitous route, that took me to CPI. And that's how I came to join CPI. I originally joined as the operations director, and at a time when the business was scaling. So what I brought actually was more commercial skill and experience of working in a more sort of contracting environment. And so, that's what I think CPI needed from me. And I think grew to appreciate that this was the company that was going to provide the answers to that question, which is, where does new technology come from? And how do we scale it? How do we take it to the point where a company like the one I've been working for could use it?
So let me dive in. It's interesting. You came in with a more commercial aspect, and then obviously a couple of years later, you were promoted to this chief executive role. Why? So what were they looking for? What do they see in your particular profile, do you think, that made them think, oh, actually, we need Frank in this role?
I think I brought a lot of change management skill to the business, and we were stepping into some pretty big programs. And so I think I was able to sort of, demonstrate that there's a generalist competence that's really needed in this role. We have 600 plus fantastic scientists, engineers, business professionals, incredible people. That's a big organization, and there's a lot of leadership needed. There's a lot of generalist skill needed, probably balanced with you've got to be curious about the technology. You've got to love the technology. You've got to be immersed in the world that CPI works in. And I think it was probably, I hope I still can demonstrate the ability to balance those two worlds, if you like.
Got it. Yeah. So in a world where there's lots of technology competency, they needed somebody to bring the change.
Yeah.
Bring the vision to change.
Yeah. The next. I think the company's 20 years old in 2024. Nigel, my predecessor, had started the company. So he'd taken it through this fantastic journey, and of course, my job was then to take it to the next phase, the next stage of growth. So it was a very logical point of passing the baton, if you like, at that moment.
And so, just to kind of distill that down, so at this stage, having been involved and exploring this and getting into it, what's now your mission at this point, in your career? How do you see that?
I mean, CPI fills, it fills a fantastic purpose. We are here to help companies develop, prove, scale up, and commercialize technology. Our why is the social and the economic consequences, the impact that we can deliver. So I very much committed CPI to the journey of a social enterprise, and describe ourselves as a social enterprise. So for me, taking CPI to a scale where science and technology are seen as being a fundamental component of a fairer economy, think of it as the next industrial revolution, if you like, where science and technology are playing a role in that, and CPI is demonstrating how we do that in a really, with a real social conscience, and we're really concerned for impact. We want to see how that, I think about the places that we work. We grew up in Teesside. On the back of ICI, at one time, ICI employed 30,000 people in Teesside. That's mind-blowing when you think about that now. And Teesside's on a fantastic journey of rediscovery and reinvention. We work in Glasgow, where our medicines manufacturing facility is, again, another great city around which the Industrial Revolution sort of grew. So for me, a lot of our purpose is, these ecosystems are also about places. They're about people and their experience of work and bringing science and technology into those ecosystems and saying, this is a really fantastic place for you to aspire to grow and to see that you can contribute to your own region. So there's a lot of, I would call it, a place-based center to our thinking in being able to demonstrate that impact.
Yeah, because you're building ecosystems, and there's actually a big center to that. I really see that. And so that's the CPI purpose, and I think you've articulated it really, really well. And that it is exciting to be part of that. How do you describe the personal mission that you're on as a business leader at this point? What's the legacy that you'd like to create?
I think it sits very clearly in that, bringing that sort of, that central social purpose, if you like. And I'd like to look back in, however many years' time and look at places like Teesside and Glasgow and, parts of the Northwest. And, I started my industrial career in the shipyards at Newcastle. You find yourself really rooted in the history and culture of our industrial development. And I'd like to look back and think I had a hand in the transition of that. It's very clear that in a digital world, global economy, we have to find a way of. I'd like to see the UK with a more goods-based economy, not just a better balance between goods and services. And I'd like to see that CPI under my leadership had a role in cementing that next industrial revolution in those places that, very particularly I have benefited from the kind of career that those places have given me. So there's a legacy of passing on the place in good shape, or in better shape than you found it, if you like. Yeah. And I think CPI is a fantastic place for doing that.
Yeah, brilliant. So I'm just going to ask you to kind of just think about that as you're on that mission. What are two things that energize and excite you at the moment, right, and drive you forward? And then what are two things that drain you, right, slow you down, frustrate you? What's the highs and the lows at the moment for you?
I think one of the highs at the moment is we are part of a national network, an organisation called the High Value Manufacturing Catapult, and that was set up about 10 years ago, and it was set up. If you're familiar with the Fraunhofer Institutes in Germany, this idea of research translation. We do great things in universities. We have fantastic research capability. How do we translate that? So the High Value Manufacturing Catapult was set up to really catalyze and accelerate that translation. And those who set it up, so this is a 40-year mission, 40 years to get this to the scale. So that's the journey we're on. We're 10 years old, and it was about the 10-year point where we hit lockdown, we hit the pandemic and lockdown and everything else. So we all did what we needed to do. But at the same time, I think we recognized a moment where we needed to redefine our purpose. We needed to be really, really clear 10 years in, what was the next 10 years going to look like, and not drift into it. Right. So we spent a lot of time. Again, one of the painful benefits of the pandemic was, a group of CEOs being able to spend time together on Zoom, and really work really intensively together with a fantastic consultancy, a company called Three Horizons, who helped us rethink our strategy. And we are now, taking that strategy into action, and working across UK manufacturing with government, and looking at even bigger ecosystems to tackle things like net zero, and really, really getting into what's the truth of the challenge that industry faces, and what's our next 10 years in really engaging that. And that is massively energizing to be in working in a program of that scale. So that that wraps in all of the capabilities that CPI has. It brings us into partnership with lots of other organizations, and it also now is it is concentrating itself into what I talked about before. There's this place-based agenda, where you could see the power of that national capability being focused on particular regions, and being able to make a real difference in them. So that really does get you out of bed in the morning. That's fantastic. It's many of us won't see this journey through, but you feel like you're laying the road for for what's possible next.
Yeah. Well, perhaps let's flip over, because that's such a big one. I think it's great. We can perhaps just leave it on that one. What's perhaps something that's a drain on you, that you find more challenging at the moment?
I think I've always hoped, and I believe sort of behaved in a way where conflict is a source of creative energy, and so the skill of managing conflict, I think is a real leadership trait that I think is hard earned. So when I see conflict sort of being wasted, if you like, or when I see that it's conflict for the sake of win-lose, I find that just sucks the life out of me. And it's finding the energy to step up and say, look, this conflict we've got to find a useful way in here. It's not about being comfortable. It's not about agreeing. It's about saying, having differences of opinion is a really, really important feature in creation, innovation, and moving the agenda forward. I think a lot of our discourse in the public sector at the moment is obviously quite challenged by that. Yeah. And I just, I suppose I find that it requires more energy as leaders to bring the counterpoint to that, and to say, almost park that. That's not how we will progress. We will use our conflict well, but the energy demand to get to that level is high.
It's Richard here with just a quick interlude. If you're serious about multiplying your impact, I have a free resource that you won't want to miss. I've put together a short email course called Exponential Leadership Principles. In it, I set out how you can use the same strategies as some of the world's top leaders to get out of incremental progress and achieve breakthrough results. Be prepared to have your current thinking challenged and to learn some very new ways of leading. If you're interested in following along, simply sign up at xquadrant.com/go/exponential. And now back to the conversation. Yeah, it's a real need to reframe those discussions, right? And to find a new way. When I'm working with people, I'm often saying, if it's like an arm wrestle, right? You're really in a losing situation. And can you redefine it as a triangle, I like to say, right? Rather than a lever, it's a triangle where both of you are observing this issue and kind of going, oh, look, we're kind of having conflict around this issue. Like, we don't quite agree. And yet we know that in some sense we're looking at, we want the same
outcome.
What do we make of that? How do we, how are we going to move that forward? And starting to kind of co-create and collaborate, even on the conflict itself. Like, how do we actually overcome this conflict? Kind of taking that meta level to kind of reflect on that. And
I think it's
space in which you can collaborate.
It's the wisdom to acknowledge that it's there, and to be able to put your whatever's in the room. Is it an ego? Is it an immovable belief? Whatever it is, to put those things to one side and say, they're just real things, but we have a responsibility as leaders, to set those aside and find a way in which we come out of this in better shape. Some days it's easier than others.
Yeah, absolutely. So Frank, I love this. I say that this mission that you're on, and that you're so fired up about the 40-year vision, I suppose, right, to create this technology-driven, goods-based economy and to revitalize that. How do you mobilize people around that vision? What's your role as chief executive, or what do you find has been working? Where do you personally struggle sometimes? What comes up for you as I talk about that idea of taking people on the journey and inspiring?
I think I'm a great believer in the power of stories. I think I find it easier to tell a story than I do to necessarily describe a strategy. So I default to stories quite a lot. Actually, to the extent that I asked I have a fantastic, energizing, creative marketing communications team, and I said, look, how do we help everybody else? With the art of storytelling. So we've actually done a piece of work inside the company about storytelling. So I think the first thing is have those stories, because they are much more relatable than perhaps restating a particular, maybe restating a crafted vision. It's more internalized through the art, through the lens of a story. I think the other thing I find is that it's constant validation. So it doesn't matter what you say, it's what's played back to you that matters. So that the balance between speaking and listening, and really hearing what's being played back when you've told a story or tried to describe a vision, describe the way that we want the company to develop. What's our destination? You're constantly iterating with the feedback loop, and I think really paying attention to that. And I think having the humility to recognise that it is a constant journey to keep that sort of that sense of vision. I also there's times also where I think to myself, don't don't worry about the vision. The vision's a destination. The culture is the journey. So spend time, really intentionally working on and thinking about culture. You will always have the vision in sight. It won't leave you. It won't vanish in the mist. It will always be there. Your culture is far more mercurial, I think, and needs that sort of needs your attention. So spend time there and trust that will take you to the vision. That's a sort of a something I find that is more. I find that more practical as a set of leadership actions.
Yeah, I know. I love that because the vision is in the future, right? So actually, it's quite unactionable in some sense.
Yeah.
Whereas the reality is you have people and they have to work together and align, and that's all around culture, right? One of my phrases is worry a bit less about strategy plus execution, and worry a bit more about alignment and leadership. Because those alignment and leadership is how you actually make strategy and execution a reality.
Yeah, quite.
Speaks to your point around culture, obviously, because leadership and culture are so entwined. Well, hey, this is a really interesting conversation. I want to kind of move on perhaps to our quick fire questions. I'm always keen to kind of get under the surface of leaders to find out what's kind of formed them or what shaped them. So what's a favorite quote that you live by or that you bore all your team with on a regular basis?
So this is quite long, but I was reading a book by a guy called Vladimir Penyakov, a book called Popsky's Private Army. It's a yarn. It's a fascinating story about something that happened in the Second World War. But I took a photograph of this page and I keep it on my phone because I just think it's an absolutely fantastic description of leadership. So here it goes. It goes like this. He's talking about his immediate team, his immediate leadership team. And he says, I could open my heart to them both and yet lose none of my authority. I was thus spared the loneliness which induces a dangerous autocratic pig-headedness in so many commanders incapable of choosing outspoken confidence. With them I was by no means always right. I could not take that acquiescence for granted, and I had to consider my decisions more carefully than if my orders had invariably been law. And I just found that paragraph, it's a long quote, but I just think that's absolutely brilliant summary of what it is to be a leader and to keep yourself in a place where you're just not comfortable. You just constantly have that. I go back to conflict. I go back to that sense of the purpose is always going to be challenging you, and to don't find yourself in a place where the people around you make you feel comfortable. They should make you feel challenged. So I love that quote about that team.
Yeah, no, I love it. What came to me as you were speaking to that was this point around, I think it said opening your heart or some words to that effect, which is really interesting because I think a lot of us, we can be very intellectual and hey, I studied at Oxford and became a strategy consultant, and you had to be the smartest person in the room, and that was kind of, and a lot of people, we find that that's how we build our careers is by that side of things. But I really have been learning myself and seeing in my clients the power of actually opening up your heart as well as bringing your intellectual firepower. I think that's actually a source of power, of impact that a lot of leaders haven't actually explored that much. it can be very, very analytical. And I think there's something there when you actually share your heart.
It's a, business is a relational activity. We conduct it with people, and I think bringing the person into the room is not it is a good thing. Who we are, what makes us tick. I think that's a very important trait in business. Yeah.
Thank you. What about a book? What's a book? Well, I guess this has been one book. Is there another book, a business book that's kind of influenced you and how you go about things?
I'm not a great student of business books, I have to say.
Might be another book.
Yeah. There's a book I read recently. It took a bit of getting through. It's quite a hard read. It's called The March of Folly, by an American historian, a lady called Barbara Tushman. I think I've pronounced her surname correctly. And it's a really interesting book about this concept of wooden-headedness, which is you can create a policy, and then you can get all of the signals that you could ever need that policy was completely wrong, and yet you still persist in following that policy to your ultimate destruction. And she starts in the Trojan Wars, and she works through the Renaissance popes, and then into Britain and America, in that sort of colonial period, and then she goes on to Vietnam. I would love her to write a sequel because I think we probably had a few years of some very interesting. But I mean, she's a fantastic historian, but you just take so much from from history, and those that it makes you realize that we reinvent our folly as frequently as we reinvent our wisdom.
It's interesting. I've been doing quite a lot of work recently on stress testing strategy, because that, again, within business, there's lots of plans that are written and get signed off and don't deliver, right? And often it's because they haven't actually undergone the stress testing before. People are so much in a rush to get on and execute and make things happen. That so many plans start off and crash and burn or die a quiet death. And I think actually being more strategic and stress testing those plans is really, really important, which is kind of related to that topic, I think.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's the validation through feedback as well. It's paying attention to that and being able to put what you thought was the truth to one side when the evidence is that's not the truth.
And obviously in the military background, the whole red team idea, right, of having conflicting
totally
people, right, trying to actually stress test these things. Great. Well, one of the questions I'd like to ask, is really around who inspires you as a leader. Many of our best guests on the show come from referrals. In fact, I think you came from that. Right, from Richard. So I'm kind of curious, who's an impactful CEO in your world who inspires you? Again, who might be a great guest or somebody who's up to big things.
I think somebody who would be fascinating to talk to is Scott White, who is the CEO of a company called Pragmatic. So we've worked with Pragmatic for about 10 years now, but Scott has steered that company. He's a very, very experienced, wise strategist, and he steered that company, working in a market that is full of large established players, and he's navigated this disruptive technology to a point now where they are, they really are on the cusp of a world scale operation. So I think Scott's. I always learn something when I talk to Scott. I always take something away from those meetings, thinking, "Wow, I hadn't thought of that." So he's a very inspirational individual.
Yeah, and that's influence, right? And when you go from a meeting thinking that, wow, I had a new perspective there, a new insight. Somebody once said, influence is helping people to think differently. Like if you actually offer something which gets people to think differently, that's actually how
how change happens.
Yeah,
Yeah,
change happens.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So no matter how much we've achieved, there's always a next level to get to. So where do you go from here as a business? What's CPI's next level? What's going to make, be your next wave of impact?
Interesting. We've spent probably the last 6 months or so just working through our strategy again, and looking at that next level. What does that next level look like? And I think what's helpful is I think it's validated to us that we're definitely on the right road. I think it's scale. I think to be able to operate in the way that we want to, and I think what the economy needs from us, particularly talking about those places, I think we need to develop a whole new range of skills to convene at an even greater level. A wider set of technologies, a broader set of stakeholders, and I think that still with that social enterprise in our heart, there's a new cohort of capability, I think, that CPI is going to, through a combination of growing and acquiring those skills, to be able to convene at a national level. So I see that's our route to greater impact is to really boost our capacity to convene with the same credibility that we've built over the last 16, 17 years.
And what will you have to do differently to multiply your impact as part of that growth?
It's the tyranny of am I busy doing the right things? We could all be busy. It's the choices. I think it's looking at the diary, looking at the stakeholders, and thinking, right, where should I be putting my time, and where are the places where my thinking is not challenged enough, is not different enough. Who should I be spending time with, who wouldn't naturally fall out of the sort of the pattern of the week to week and the month to month business. So I think it's finding those places for different and more challenging conversations, and finding those within the stakeholders that I think are going to be really meaningful. I mean, we're doing a lot more work with the investment community now than we did, say, 3 or 4 years ago. And just from some of the time I've spent with investors, I can see that they are extremely focused and motivated, and sometimes finding the complementary elements of that motivation, but also recognizing the differences in those motivations. I can often go into a meeting thinking, I think these are a great set of ideas, and find that they will say, no, every single one of those ideas is absolutely rubbish. These are a better set of ideas. Right. And so you think, wow, that's a really, really interesting, completely different set of views. Yeah. Because what they're looking for is I have interpreted as different from what I'm trying to gain from that, that relationship or that opportunity. So I think spending time with people like that will lift my head and elevate my thinking to say, look, to go to this next scale, there's a wider group of stakeholders and a different set of thinking that we will need.
Yeah. That's what I was really thinking actually during our conversation. What was coming up for me was, which of the phone calls that you're afraid to make right now, right? Or that feel a bit edgy, right? That feel you don't quite have the credibility, or what are you going to say to these people? But normally it's that. I always like to say that what's the phone call that's going to change everything? The rooms that you need to be in, because you have a clear mission. You have an engine that's delivering that. I'm sure there's always tweaks and upgrades you need to make on how you're doing things, but yeah, in kind of creating more and more powerful ecosystems. I think you're right. You've nailed some great points there. Like, how do you challenge your own thinking? How do you up level where you're focusing and the relationships you're with? I think I think it's great for all of us actually to ask that. I mean, it's why I always say, who are the community? What are the communities that you're part of? What are the conversations you're part of? Where do you put your attention in the day? And who is it who's really speaking to you the unvarnished truth? Because
that's right.
Level is so easy to have conversations that are not challenging in the way that you need them. Fascinating stuff. Well, hey, Frank, thank you for this great discussion. If people want to find more out about you or about CPI, how do they do that?
I think just head for the website. But I'll give you the website because it's not just cpi.com. So it's www.uk-cpi.com. And that's our go-to place. We're on LinkedIn, Twitter, etc. But if you want to find out about CPI, that's the place to start.
Perfect. Hey, well, Frank, thank you again. I think we've really covered a lot of ground today. I mean, we've covered. I'm just thinking, we covered this whole mission in terms of being a goods-based economy, this focus on place, and how perhaps that gets overlooked very often in our current mindset. We've talked about that power of conflict and how you adjust that. We've looked about how actually sometimes stories are better ways of getting to strategy than actually talking about the abstract principle strategy. Talked about how culture is perhaps the vehicle to get to the destination of vision. And then we've spent a bit of time here, I think, talking a lot around around how do you up-level the conversations as you want to build bigger and bigger ecosystems and be in more impactful rooms, if you like. So I think these are all fantastic insights from our conversation. So I just want to say thank you for the time and look forward to hearing from you as you continue the journey and deliver on that 40-year vision.
Fantastic. Thanks, Richard.
Thanks a lot, Frank. Take care. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Now let's talk about you. When you're in top leadership, when you're in the biggest role of your career, who supports you at a deep level as you lead others? Who helps you multiply your impact and get to the next level? If you're ready to learn more about our content, our coaching, and our community, then visit us at Xquadrant.com.